The city buzzed with life, people rushing, cars honking, lights flashing across tall glass buildings. Amid all that noise, I was just another face in the crowd. I used to be an ordinary office worker, stuck in the same routine day after day, not knowing that everything was about to change. I finally landed a sales job, but all these business trips were starting to wear me out. Tomorrow, I'd be riding a private train for another meeting in the countryside, not exactly my idea of fun. I checked the weather report. Gah! It's snowing real hard over there. I sighed, pulling on my coat. I'll go buy some winter gear. I just hope I can get there a day early. Later that afternoon, I stopped by a shopping mall, hunting for something warm to wear. Families passed by, laughing and carrying shopping bags, their breath turning to mist in the chilly air. For a moment, watching them under the bright winter festival signs, I wondered when was the last time I'd felt that kind of warmth. I wandered into the light novel section, shelves packed with colorful covers and titles I half recognized. Funny, I murmured, I'm back to reading stuff like this to kill time while traveling. Back in college, I used to refresh novel websites every day, waiting for updates from my favorite stories. Looking at the book in my hand, I couldn't help but smile. Maybe a part of me never really grew up. Morning came faster than I expected. The station buzzed with the noise of rolling suitcases and departing trains. I tightened my grip on my luggage and took a deep breath. All right, I'm all set. With a grin, I stepped forward toward the gate. Time to do some business. The journey started smoothly, until the storm grew wild. Snow kept falling, thicker and heavier, swallowing the tracks beneath us. Was it the thick snow that piled up on the rails? Or did the conductor make an error? I don't know the reason, but in the next instant, everything went white. The world spun out of control, metal screeched, glass shattered, and snow swallowed everything. My consciousness got cut off immediately after it all went down. The last thing I saw was my hand reaching out and that same light novel cover flashing before my eyes. And then, there was light. When I woke up, I wasn't on the train anymore. Stone walls surrounded me, and a castle stretched into the sky. That's when I realized I'd been reincarnated as Millimos Nanet, the seventh child of the Nanet kingdom, age 5. My lord! Lord Millimos! I blinked awake to the sound of a woman's voice calling out to me. A maid stood by my bed, worry in her eyes. Were you having a bad dream? You were muttering something about business trips and Dawson in your sleep. I sat up slowly, still half lost between two worlds. Alictem, I murmured with a faint smile. The name felt strange on my tongue, yet oddly familiar. I scratched my head, trying to hide my embarrassment. No way. I said something like that? The maid smiled softly, relieved to see me awake. At first, I was confused. None of this made sense. But if this really was the reality of my situation, then there was nothing I could do about it except laugh it off and move forward. 7 years passed, and I slowly came to accept the truth of my new life. The memories of my old world faded like a distant dream, replaced by the rhythm of this kingdom. Now, standing taller and stronger, I smiled at my reflection. And now, I'll be 12 this year. The years of peace didn't last forever. I'm sorry I woke you up early, but Alectum's voice carried a hint of tension. Don't worry, I understand, I replied. The war's about to start, so we're sending out the bird, right? That's why we were hiding in a small town near the battlefield waiting for the storm to begin. Alictem, I called out calmly. Bring out the bird. The old knight gave a firm nod, pulling something from beneath a wooden shelf. Here it is, he said, lifting a small, glowing orb shaped like an egg, faint light pulsing within. Whatever the bird was, it wasn't just for sending messages. I took the strange object from Alectum's hands. It was warm, almost alive. This looks like an owl, or maybe a horned owl, I murmured, examining its round body and glassy eyes. But they call it an ibis, apparently. Its gaze seemed to follow me, as if waiting for a command. After reincarnating into this world, one thing consumed me: the art of creation. I closed my eyes and whispered softly, move, fly, flutter with false wings. I give you temporary life. The ibis stirred in my palm, wings trembling as if awakening from a dream. And then, with a graceful flap, it soared into the air, my very first success brought to life. I raised my hand high, energy surging through me like a living flame. See and show the view from your hollow eyes to the crystal, obey my will, soar through the sky. In via Magume. I chanted, voice echoing through the room. Light burst forth, the ibis spreading its wings in a radiant glow. That was magic. The ibis spread its wings and shot out the window, gliding above the rooftops of the quiet town. People below pointed in wonder, their eyes following the glowing bird as it soared through the morning light. Aliktam opened the shutters, watching in silence. For the first time since reincarnating, I'd created something that truly lived. All right. It flew. I shouted, unable to contain my excitement. The ibis soared higher, glimmering in the sunlight outside the window. Quickly, close the window. Aliktam ordered, already preparing another device. He held up a small crystal sphere, eyes sharp. Next, activate this magic tool. Aliktam raised the crystal sphere, murmuring an incantation. O crystal, reveal to us the scenery from the bird's eye. Imubu Rokuro. The orb glowed, and a shimmering image appeared before us, the view from the ibis high above the fields. Oh, it's projecting the bird's view. I gasped. Aliktam nodded proudly. Now we can see what the bird sees. Aliktam adjusted the crystal, the image flickering but stable. As expected, it worked well, he said proudly. It's a magic tool made by analyzing the lost technology of the Magic Empire, after all. I grinned, watching the glowing projection hover before us. Oh, it's projecting perfectly. Shoo, he hissed quickly, gesturing for silence. We can't afford to draw attention now. The fact that we're analyzing the Magic Empire's technology is top secret, got that? Aliktam warned, his voice sharp. I laughed awkwardly, scratching my cheek. Oops, it slipped my mind. Outside, the ibis soared through the open sky, its eyes reflecting both beauty and danger. Even from this distance, I could feel it, the weight of the knowledge we were tampering with. Aliktam's eyes narrowed as the image in the crystal grew clearer. It's coming into view. I leaned closer, my heart pounding. No way. The projection showed endless rows of soldiers' armor glinting under the morning sun. That's way too many, I whispered. If we combined both armies, that's over 20,000, right? The war wasn't just coming, it was already at our doorstep. Through the crystal's light, we saw them, an endless line of armored soldiers, shields raised, blades gleaming in unison. Their formation was flawless, their silence more terrifying than any battle cry. At the front stood a single figure draped in a cape that rippled against the wind. His armor shone like silver fire, and his sword rested firmly against the earth. Who is that? I murmured. Aliktam's face hardened. That's no ordinary commander. That's the Empire's war saint. The air seemed to freeze, a storm of steel and destiny waiting to break loose. As the ibis soared high above the battlefield, one of the armored soldiers below lifted his spear, pointing directly at it. Are they saying something? I asked, my breath catching. Aliktam squinted at the projection. It seems so, but the bird can't transmit audio, can it? My heart skipped. The soldiers' helmets turned upward, their movements synchronized, too precise, too deliberate. It was as if they knew they were being watched. And then, the commander below raised his sword ever so slightly, straight toward the sky. The entire army stood motionless, an ocean of steel reflecting the cold sunlight. A single figure stepped forward, tall, imposing, his spear gleaming with faint magic light. A hush fell over the ranks. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. From our magical view, the soundless scene was more terrifying than any battle cry could be. They're not moving, I whispered. Are they waiting for something? Aliktam frowned, eyes narrowing at the projection. No, he muttered. They're signaling. The entire front line moved as one. 1,000 blades rose toward the sky, catching the sun in a blinding flash. Shields locked into place, forming a wall of iron that stretched beyond the horizon. The soundless image flickered through the crystal, yet I could almost feel the earth tremble. "They're preparing for battle," I breathed. Alectem's eyes darkened. "No, they're already in formation. Whoever commands them knows we're watching." The faint shimmer of mana began to ripple through the army like heat waves. Something massive was about to begin. "Move the bird higher so we won't be noticed," Alectem ordered, his voice low but firm. "Oh, okay," I replied, clutching the glowing orb tightly. The air around me began to hum as faint rings of magic formed in the air. "Move, move. False wings, flutter, rise, ascend. Obey my will and soar through the sky." The light grew stronger, illuminating the dim room in shimmering white. "Nade Hemu," I chanted, the spell flowing instinctively from my lips. Outside, the magical ibis flapped its radiant wings and climbed higher into the heavens, disappearing into the clouds. For now, we were safe from their sight, or so I hoped. The ibis climbed higher, cutting through thin wisps of cloud before leveling out. From this height, the land stretched endlessly, and below, the truth of the situation revealed itself. "Whoa," I gasped as the crystal's image sharpened. "There are so many of them." Like twin black tides, two massive forces faced each other, their numbers blotting out the ground. Lines of soldiers shimmered like scales of a living beast. Even from above, I could feel their murderous intent rising, silent, waiting to erupt. Alectem clenched his jaw. "This isn't just a border clash. It's a full-scale war." The ibis trembled slightly against the turbulent air, and I steadied it with a whisper. "Easy, don't let them see us. They're moving," I shouted, my eyes glued to the shimmering projection. The mass of soldiers below began to surge forward like an unstoppable wave, the soundless image somehow deafening in its intensity. "The war's officially begun," Alectem muttered, his tone grim yet steady. The faint light of the orb reflected off his sharp eyes, filled with both wisdom and worry. He folded his arms and leaned closer to the projection. "Watch closely. Lord Millimos." I turned to him, startled. There was something in his voice, reverence, but also fear. Whoever Millimos was, even Alectem spoke the name with weight. As the crystal flickered, the first clash of armies erupted within its glow, and the world trembled. My breath caught as the realization sank in. "The Magic Empire, Magistri Prunbrul, and the Holy Knight's Kingdom, Mudu Bin your natal," I whispered. Two nations, each unmatched in power, each shaped by centuries of conquest and faith, now stood on opposite sides of the same battlefield once again. "The war between the two strongest nations in the world," my voice trembled slightly. "Which has been raging for 50 years. Alectem didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the shimmering projection, reflecting the faint glow of magic like cold steel. To him, this wasn't just history, it was reality, repeating itself once more. Below, the Holy Night Kingdom's army surged forward in a blinding silver tide. Steel boots thundered against the ground, banners whipped in the wind, yet there was no formation, no coordination. It was sheer, reckless faith driving them onward. I swallowed hard. "Alectem, the Magic Empire will win, right?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left the projection, the glow reflecting off his face like cold fire. "Oh," he finally murmured. "That depends." I frowned. "But, the Holy Knights are charging without any defense. They're just easy targets for mages." And then, the image flickered, an explosion of light erupted from the sky. The Magic Empire's mages unleashed their barrage. Fireballs streaked down like falling stars, bursting upon the charging knights in waves of flame and smoke. The battlefield became a sea of chaos, light and ash swallowing the horizon. The explosions faded into a haze of smoke and fire. Through the projection, I could barely make out the battlefield, craters and scattered armor glowing red from the heat. My heart raced. I jumped up, eyes wide with excitement. "See? They got wiped out," I shouted, half in disbelief, half in awe. It was the first time I had seen magic used like this, real, destructive, merciless. But Alectem didn't share my enthusiasm. His gaze was fixed on the orb, unmoving. Don't celebrate yet, he murmured under his breath. On the projection, figures began to move through the smoke, dark silhouettes of knights, unshaken, their formation reforming like a living wall. And behind them, a line of holy lances began to rise. The smoke began to clear. And my triumphant grin froze. From within the haze of ash and debris, figures emerged, unscathed. Knights in gleaming armor strode forward through the chaos, their capes tattered but their movements resolute. Each step crushed burnt earth beneath their boots. Wait, that magic should have taken them down. I gasped, clutching the orb tighter. Electum's calm voice broke through my panic. The spells those soldiers from the Magic Empire use are nothing more than stones thrown by children, he said. The Holy Night Kingdom, they rely on something far greater. I turned toward him, eyes wide. He continued, they've mastered the divine art, a sacred technique that fortifies the body and repels magic itself. On the projection, the knight's armor shimmered faintly, glowing with runic light as they advanced fearlessly into the storm of spells. I swallowed hard. My earlier excitement was gone, replaced by awe and fear. The ground trembled as more fireballs rained from above, engulfing the knights in waves of flame. Yet still, they marched forward, the light of their divine blessing shimmering against the fire. I clenched my fists. So, magic like that doesn't work on the Holy Knight's Kingdom? Alectem didn't look away from the projection. It rarely does, he said, voice calm as ever. Then, how did the Magic Empire even survive for 50 years? For a moment, he was silent. Then, slowly, a faint smile crossed his face. You'll see soon enough. His eyes glinted, sharp, knowing, as the projection shifted. Beyond the line of knights, at the far end of the battlefield, several cloaked figures stood with staffs raised high. The air around them distorted, glowing faintly with a light that made even the crystal orb tremble. Something immense was about to begin. The orb in Electum's hand began to pulse softly at first, then with blinding light that filled the entire room. I shielded my eyes, squinting at the projection. What is that? Through the glowing haze, I could see the enemy formations from above, the knights' exact movements, their advance, their weak points. That's the same kind of magical device the bird was based on. I gasped. Alectem didn't respond, but the faint curve of his lips told me I was right. Do they use that to pinpoint the knights' positions? Outside, through the bird's vision, I could see streams of light forming intricate circles across the ground. Each rune pulsed in rhythm with the orb in Electum's hand. And then I understood. The bird wasn't just a messenger. It was a weapon's eye. And then the world erupted. From the heavens, blinding columns of light struck the battlefield like divine spears. Each impact shattered the earth, sending shockwaves tearing through ranks of armored knights. The ground split open. The roar of destruction swallowed every sound, the clash of swords, the cries of men, everything drowned beneath the fury of magic. The bird's vision shook violently, flickering as smoke and dust clouded the sky. What is that? I shouted, gripping the orb so tightly my knuckles went white. Alectem didn't answer right away. He just watched, eyes reflecting the fiery glow of the battlefield below. Finally, he murmured. That is why the Magic Empire still stands. The shockwaves from the blasts tore through the clouds. I could feel the vibrations even from our safe house, tremors shaking the wooden floor beneath us. On the projection, the bird's image flickered wildly, spinning as violent winds ripped through the battlefield. Whoa! The bird's getting caught in it! I yelled, panic tightening in my throat. The once stable view became a blur of fire, smoke, and sky. The creature's wings struggled, feathers scattering into light. Fly away! Fly! I shouted, pressing my hands to the orb as if that could reach it. For a moment, it seemed like the little construct might make it, beating its wings harder, breaking free from the shockwaves. But then the world flashed white again. And the connection was severed. The thunderous roar faded at last, leaving behind only the crackle of dying flames and the distant rumble of falling debris. For a long while, neither of us spoke. I stared blankly at the shimmering projection, now nothing but a haze of dust and ruin. The barrage, I finally whispered. Aliktam folded his arms, his voice calm but heavy. The barrage seems to have calmed down. But in that silence, something felt wrong. No cheering. No movement. No sign of life. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. Did anyone survive that? The old mage's expression didn't change, yet the faintest flicker of regret passed through his eyes. War rarely leaves anyone untouched, he said quietly. And I realized. The bird wasn't the only thing that had been caught in the storm. Just as the haze began to clear, a shadow moved. Through the smoke and scorched ground, figures emerged, armored knights still standing, their capes torn but their eyes blazing. I gasped, leaning forward as the image refocused. What? The earth trembled again, not from magic, but from the thunder of hooves. A lone rider burst through the chaos, his silver armor gleaming even through the soot. HFF. 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 The horse snorted, metal plates clanging as it cut through the battlefield. The knight's sword gleamed, slicing through the wreckage of fallen soldiers and shattered spells. It was impossible. No ordinary human could have survived that barrage. But he wasn't ordinary. This was a warrior who moved with divine precision, the embodiment of the Holy Knight's kingdom's will. As the boy's eyes widened, Alectum's voice came low, almost in awe. Behold, the Holy Knight Commander of Binur Natal. Lord Millimos, Alectum's calm voice broke through the sound of the battlefield. Next, look a little behind the front line. Oh, okay, I replied, adjusting the magic viewer's focus. The image shifted, and my breath caught. There, behind the ranks of armored soldiers, stood towering figures cloaked in light. Each held a colossal staff crowned with an orb that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ground trembled faintly beneath their presence. Do you see them? Aliktam asked, eyes glinting with quiet pride. The ones carrying those massive staves? I nodded slowly, speechless. The realization hit me all at once. These are the Empire's real weapons, aren't they? The old mage gave a faint smile. They are the Grand Arcanists, conduits of the Empire's core magic. The ones who decide how the tide of war flows. Above them, the enchanted bird circled nervously, its reflection flashing across the stave's glowing surfaces. As the orbs began to hum in unison, a dreadful light spread across the battlefield once more. The prelude to a storm far greater than before. The explosions lit up the horizon, a storm of fire, dust, and magic. Every strike from the Magic Empire's side was enough to pulverize stone and melt steel, yet, the figures within the smoke kept moving. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the viewing orb. How? That power, that magic should have been enough to wipe them out. Aliktam didn't flinch, his tone steady as his gaze remained locked on the projection. If it were a normal soldier, yes. They'd be vaporized instantly. The smoke parted, revealing silhouettes of knights still charging forward, shields raised high, glowing faintly with divine light. But for a knight, he continued, that magic still isn't enough. I stared in disbelief as one of the knights, armor cracked and smoldering, raised his sword skyward, his body still moving purely out of sheer will. Divine art, I whispered. Aliktam nodded slowly. The Holy Knight's strength doesn't come from mana alone. It comes from faith, the power that refuses to die, even when the body breaks. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Even in the face of overwhelming destruction, they advanced, unwavering. The roar of battle surged like a storm. The front line of the Holy Knights, glowing with divine light, broke through the barrage of explosions, unstoppable, relentless. With a deafening cry, the lead knight raised his blade high. His armor still smoldered from magical burns, yet his eyes gleamed through the visor with unwavering resolve. He spurred his steed forward. The ground trembled beneath the armored horse's gallop, each stride fueled by faith and fury. The Magic Empire's soldiers scrambled to raise shields, but it was too late. SHHHK. In one sweeping arc, the knight's sword cleaved through the enemy ranks, scattering them like leaves before a storm. Bodies and weapons flew into the air, the impact echoing across the plains. Another knight followed, his own blade radiating light that cut through darkened armor as though slicing through shadow itself. From their vantage point, Alectem and Millimos watched in stunned silence as the bird's projection flickered with the chaos of clashing steel. Alectem's voice broke the tension, grim but steady. This is why the war has lasted 50 years. Divine art isn't just a shield, it's the will of the gods made manifest. Millimos swallowed hard, eyes wide as another brilliant flash filled the orb. The war between faith and sorcery had only just begun, and both sides were far from breaking. The holy knights plunged into the enemy ranks, and the world erupted into chaos. Steel met steel. Magic collided with faith. Sparks and blood flew together beneath the crimson sky. One knight drove his sword straight through a mage's barrier, the impact shattering it like glass before cutting deep into his chest. The mage's eyes widened in disbelief before collapsing into the dust. Another knight deflected a flaming projectile with his blade, the holy light radiating from it cutting through the inferno itself. Behind him, the divine glow pulsed brighter with every chant, every prayer whispered beneath a breath of exhaustion. The air was thick with smoke, screams, and the dull echo of magic bursting against armor. Alectem leaned closer to the crystal projection, his eyes narrowing. "Look closely," he said quietly. "The Magic Empire's forces are being overwhelmed, but not broken." "Not yet." The image shimmered, showing the mages forming tight circles, hands raised in synchronized motion. "They're preparing something," Millimos muttered, voice tense. Alectem nodded grimly. "Yes. They're calling upon the second phase of battle, the arcane core." Millimos felt his chest tighten as he stared at the glowing patterns forming beneath the mage's feet. The first clash had been human against human. But what was coming next was far beyond that. The two watched in silence as the crystal's light flickered. In the projection, massive explosions erupted across the battlefield like the earth itself was tearing apart. Millimos's breath caught. "Those blasts, they're even stronger than before." Alectem nodded grimly. "The arcane core's been activated. Now the real battle begins." Outside the orb's glow, only the sound of distant rumbling filled the room. The sound of war reshaping the land. Millimos stared at the glowing projection, his voice trembling. What is this?" Alectem chuckled softly beside him. "Ha ha ha, even your older brothers reacted the same way." Millimos groaned, rubbing his temples. "This isn't funny, Alectem." But deep down, the shock in his eyes showed it all. The terrifying beauty of the Empire's true power. Millimos watched the battle unfold, eyes wide with disbelief. "Even a single knight charging here could wipe out our soldiers." Alectem's gaze hardened. If those great staves all released fire at once, the entire land would burn within minutes. The boy swallowed hard, for the first time, truly understanding the scale of war. "No way, this can't be the same military strength as ours," Millimos muttered. Alectem gave a small nod, voice calm but heavy. 50 years of war forged them into monsters of power. No nation dares challenge them. Millimos clenched his fists. So this was what it meant to stand at the top of the world. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow of the magic orb illuminating their faces. Alectem sat firm, his eyes calm but filled with gravity. "That's the way of this world," he said, his voice steady. "Watching the war between those two nations, it's a rite of passage for every Nonet prince." Millimos looked at him, the words heavy on his young shoulders. He thought about the endless bloodshed he'd just seen in the screams, the fire, the chaos, and realized this was not a story meant to entertain. It was a warning. He was no longer a boy watching war from afar, he was being prepared for it. Millimos's gaze stayed fixed on the magic projection, watching the lifeless battlefield fade into mist. Seeing this, he whispered, "I understand it now. To keep peace in Nonet, we must never provoke those two nations." Alectem nodded, folding his hands before him. "Considering your age, Lord Millimos, it may seem too soon to learn such truths, but this is the burden of your birth." He turned toward him, his tone softer now. "You were born into a position where you can't simply look away anymore." The boy clenched his fists, determination flickering behind his eyes. He finally understood peace wasn't granted. It was preserved through restraint, wisdom, and the strength to endure. Inside the grand throne hall, the air was still. Heavy curtains filtered the sunlight, casting long shadows over the polished floor. At the far end sat the king of Nanette, his presence alone commanding silence. Before him stood Millo, his small frame unwavering despite the weight of the royal gaze. Not only were you blessed with incredible magical talent, the king's voice echoed through the chamber, deep and regal, but you've also mastered the sacred art of divine technique. The courtiers standing along the marble walls murmured softly, their eyes filled with awe and disbelief. Millo remained still, every word from the throne etching deeper into his resolve. The young boy raised his head, eyes shining with determination. The king leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting from pride to command. And because of that gift, you shall serve this nation not as a mere prince, but as a soldier of honor. Millo took a breath, his heart pounding in his chest. At the age of 12, the king declared, "You are hereby appointed as a marshal of the national army." The room fell silent again. Even the wind beyond the palace walls seemed to stop. Though still a child, Millo felt the full weight of destiny settle on his shoulders. A future carved not by choice, but by power. Millo sighed, slumping slightly in his chair. Okay, I get how big my role is," he groaned, waving his hands as if trying to push away the weight of responsibility. Behind him, Alictam watched quietly, an amused smile tugging at his lips. The boy rubbed the back of his neck, muttering to himself. "I got so obsessed with magic that I ended up mastering divine art by accident, and that's what made me marshal." He puffed out a breath, resting his cheek on his palm. "Seriously. I ended up in such a weird position." It wasn't arrogance that filled his words, but a mix of disbelief and reluctant pride. He never aimed to lead, he just wanted to learn. The scene shifted to the grand towers of the royal palace, sunlight glinting off the stone walls. Millo's voice echoed in his thoughts. "I was planning to live a carefree life," he reflected, gazing out the window, just the youngest prince enjoying peace, since, well, I reincarnated into one. He let out a small laugh, half bitter, half nostalgic. "But no," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly, "putting a prince as marshal was just a ceremonial way for the crown to keep the army under control." He sighed again, watching the birds fly past the palace spires. "Guess I'm just a convenient piece on the board." Millo leaned back in his chair, resting his hand on his cheek as a faint smile crossed his face. "Well," he murmured under his breath, a hint of amusement in his tone, "as an ex-salesman, it doesn't feel bad to have my effort and talent recognized." He chuckled softly to himself, thinking back to the life he once lived, one filled with numbers, deals, and deadlines, far from magic or politics. Now, he stood at the heart of a kingdom's destiny, wrapped in power he never imagined having. The thought made him grin, pride flickering just beneath his calm exterior. But as his eyes drifted toward the glowing orb beside him, his expression hardened. Still, he thought, narrowing his gaze, it's shocking how far above those two nations stand. For a moment, his reflection shimmered in the light of the sphere, a reminder of the endless battle between power and pride. He clenched his hand slightly. "Their magic, their divine arts, none of it compares to my power." The air in the room grew heavier, the calm replaced by quiet conviction. Millo wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact, one that would soon shake the world itself. The morning sun bathed the streets in gold as Millo fastened his cloak and adjusted the strap of his satchel. His mentor, Alictam, stood beside him with arms crossed, wearing the usual look of concern. "Be careful," Alictam warned, his tone stern but fatherly. "Don't go overboard." Millo waved him off casually. "It'll be fine," he said with a grin. "I can strengthen my body with divine art. Sure, I'm not at a holy knight's level, but it's plenty for what I need." Alictam sighed. "You say that every time." Yeah, Millo replied, already walking toward the gate. But just as he turned the corner, the older man called out again, "And please stop picking up discarded junk. It brings bad luck." Millo chuckled over his shoulder. "We're only picking up what others threw away. Nothing wrong with that." From the top of the city wall, the two figures looked small against the vast open road ahead. The wind carried faint laughter and the sound of distant chatter. Millimos and Alectem stood for a moment beneath the shadow of the gate, the quiet hum of the town behind them. Another day, another mission, Millimos muttered, his eyes set toward the forest beyond the horizon. Alectem shook his head but couldn't hide a faint smile. You really haven't changed, have you? Guess not, Millimos said, hands behind his head as he started walking forward, confident and carefree. The mentor's eyes softened as he watched the boy go. There was something about that determination, a spark that even fate itself couldn't extinguish. Millimos squinted against the sunlight, raising a small crystal orb to his eye. He murmured, focusing his thoughts as fate light pulsed from within the sphere. Alectem stood nearby, arms crossed. Can you see through the bird's view? He asked. For a moment, Millimos didn't answer, his brows furrowed in deep concentration. The world around him blurred, replaced by the rush of wind and the vast expanse of open sky. His vision soared higher, past clouds, past the glittering rooftops of the city. Yeah, he finally said, a small smirk appearing. I can. Below them, an owl glided gracefully through the air, its eyes glowing faintly with the same light as Millimos's crystal. Through the owl's vision, the battlefield stretched endlessly below, two mighty armies standing on opposite sides, flags fluttering as they reformed their lines. Millimos frowned. Both armies are arranging their formations again, it looks like they might start another fight. Alectem's calm voice broke through his focus. No need to worry. Once they finish their formations, the officers will negotiate for surrender. If neither side yields, he paused, his gaze darkening slightly, then another battle will follow. Millimos remained silent, watching from above as the tension below grew heavier. Soldiers shifted uneasily, and even from the sky, he could feel it, the calm before another storm. Millimos kept his focus sharp, the crystal pressed against his eye as the world blurred into a bird's eye view once more. Through the owl's sight, he could see the tension below, two armies standing across from each other, their chosen representatives shouting words that barely carried across the field. It's true, he said, his voice calm but thoughtful. Both sides have people out front yelling something, looks like a negotiation. Alectem nodded beside him, eyes narrowing. Move the bird, he instructed. Search for a place where discarded gear could be collected safely. Somewhere quiet and away from the main standoff. Millimos adjusted his stance, refocusing through the crystal. The bird shifted direction, wings cutting through the air as it began to sweep over the distant terrain. The owl soared higher, gliding over the vast stretch of battlefield until the smoke and chaos gave way to open plains and a distant line of trees. I see it, Millimos said, his voice steady. If we find a forest a little farther out, we can hide and scavenge there. Alectem gave a small nod. Good. That'll keep us out of trouble. Millimos smiled faintly, the confidence returning to his tone. Got it. I'll look for it. The owl's cry echoed softly as it dipped toward the horizon, and Millimos followed its gaze, the sky reflected in his determined eyes. Whatever awaited beyond that forest, he was ready for it. The owl soared high above the battlefield, its wings slicing quietly through the air. Below, the chaos had dimmed into uneasy silence, scattered soldiers tending to the wounded, the smoke of burned-out magic fading into the wind. Millimos watched through its eyes, scanning the open land. A small river cut through the plain like a silver ribbon, winding past patches of trees and the remains of wooden bridges. It was peaceful here, untouched by war. There, he murmured to himself, guiding the bird toward the valley. It was a good spot, safe, quiet, and far enough from danger. The owl's wings glimmered faintly as it descended, the connection between boy and bird glowing soft and steady. Back inside the wooden lodge, the glow faded as Millimos lowered the crystal orb, blinking away the dizziness. Lord Millimos, Alectem's calm voice broke the silence. Millimos turned to him, curious. HM? What is it? The older man crossed his arms, glancing out the small window where faint sounds of distant battle still echoed. It's about time the fighting slows down, he said evenly. We should leave the lodge soon. Millimos leaned back, thoughtful. Yeah, he agreed softly. Before things start up again. The faint hum of magic lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, peace felt close enough to touch. From above, the field was chaos once more, a storm of magic and steel. Explosions rippled across the barren land, scattering debris and men alike. The ground trembled with every blast, the cries of soldiers drowned beneath the roar of battle. Millo narrowed his eyes, keeping his focus steady through the owl's vision. "It looks like the battle will keep going for a little longer." "No," he muttered, uncertainty flickering in his tone. Alectem's voice was calm, but there was a heaviness to it. "At this rate, both armies will fight themselves into exhaustion before dusk." The owl's wings cut through the drifting smoke, and through its eyes, Millo could see knights still clashing fiercely, unwilling to yield. Millo dropped his hand from the crystal orb, exhaling sharply. "No, it's getting chaotic," he said. "But soon, they'll have no choice but to retreat." He turned to Alectem, determination in his eyes. "Got it. Let's move before the next wave starts." The older man studied him for a moment, that fire, that resolve, before giving a small nod. "Are you really going, my lord?" Millo smirked faintly. "You think I came all this way just to watch?" Outside, the thunder of war rolled across the plains, but in that small, dimly lit room, resolve burned quietly, stronger than any fire spell. Millo stood firm, clutching the crystal sphere tightly in his hand. The faint glow from within reflected in his determined eyes. "I know it's dangerous," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm going." Alectem frowned deeply, his tone sharp with concern. "Even after they withdraw, battlefields are still full of danger. You could get caught in the crossfire or worse." But Millo only smiled, the kind of grin that came from someone who'd already made up his mind. "After all, we got the bird and the crystal the same way, didn't we? You of all people should know fortune favors those who move first." The room went silent for a heartbeat. Alectem sighed, realizing there was no stopping him. The boy who stood before him wasn't acting out of recklessness, but purpose. Millo lifted the crystal toward the light, and it shimmered with threads of mana that danced between his fingers. "The goal this time," he said quietly, "is to learn the full strength of those two nations." He could already see the strategy forming in his mind, the hidden power behind their weapons, the intricate spells laced into their armor. "And the other goal," he continued, eyes narrowing, "is to scavenge the discarded weapons and armor from the battlefield, and steal their magic technology." Alectem's eyes widened slightly. The young prince wasn't just chasing curiosity, he was preparing for something much bigger. The air between them hummed faintly with tension and unspoken resolve. Millo clenched his fist, eyes blazing with determination. "Even if it's just on paper," he declared, his voice strong and unwavering, "I'm still a marshal." The glow of the magic crystal pulsed faintly in his palm, reflecting the fire in his eyes. "I'll do anything, public projects, research, whatever it takes, to advance Nanette's magical technology," he continued, the spark of ambition lighting every word. For a moment, Alectem simply stared at him, that boyish face, so young, yet filled with the conviction of a commander. It was hard to believe this child once sought only an easy life. Now, he was shouldering the. Millo brought the crystal up to his eye, peering through its swirling light. "Oh," he gasped, as a vivid image took shape, the terrain laid out from a bird's-eye view, forests and rivers stretching endlessly. He turned sharply toward his advisor. "Alectem. The map, bring the map, quick." Alectem immediately nodded, already understanding what his young lord intended. "Understood." From above, through the owl's vision, the world shifted, lines of terrain, cracks in the earth, and the remnants of battle burned into memory. Millo's lips curved into a confident grin. "Let's see just how much we can learn from this war." Millo and Alectem spread the map across the table, tracing their fingers over its worn parchment. Millo pointed at a dark patch near the forest's edge. "This area," he said, eyes narrowing, "has a lot of burned trees and scorched leaves. Maybe there was fighting here?" Alectem leaned closer, studying the spot carefully. But it's away from where both armies are currently positioned." Millo nodded, already making his decision. "Then that's where we'll go." "Understood," Alectem replied, folding the map swiftly. "I'll keep watch from above." He motioned toward the owl, which immediately took flight, soaring high and circling over the dense forest canopy. Millo grinned as he adjusted his cloak. I'll have it circle above the area and signal if there's movement. But before they could set off, Alektem cleared his throat loudly. Ahem. Millo blinked, tilting his head with a puzzled look. Ha? What is it? Alektem sighed, pressing a hand to his temple. There's one more important thing before we go. The young marshal raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Whatever his mentor was about to say, it clearly wasn't about strategy. The wind rustled through the grass as Alektem walked beside Millo, his tone turning serious. If by chance we encounter survivors from either nation, he said gravely, remember, we're nothing but a scavenging team. Millo blinked. A scavenging team? Alektem nodded, lowering his voice as if rehearsing the lie. We'll act as hired hands, collecting discarded weapons for the Magic Empire. If anyone asks, we're gathering them for paid labor. He fixed Millo with a stern look. Don't forget that, my lord. One wrong word could cost us our lives. Millo straightened, pretending to take the warning solemnly, but there was a spark of mischief in his eyes. Don't forget that. Alektem repeated, folding his arms with authority. Millo looked up at him, a faint grin tugging at his lips. Yeah, I get it, he said lightly, but his tone carried quiet confidence rather than obedience. The old knight frowned but didn't push further. He knew the boy's mind was already spinning with ideas far beyond a simple cover story. A single moment of silence stretched between them, the wind carried distant echoes of battle fading in the horizon. And then, Millo smiled. A small, knowing smile that promised both brilliance and trouble. The sun was already high, painting the dirt path in warm gold as Millo adjusted the straps of his pack. His young face lit up with excitement. I know, Grandpa Arem, he called over his shoulder, his steps light with impatience. Arem sighed deeply, placing a hand on his chest as though to steady his aging heart. No running, Millo, he barked. But the boy only laughed, flashing a mischievous grin. It's a race. Before Arem could respond, Millo was already sprinting ahead, the wind catching his scarf as he dashed up the road. Arem groaned, watching the boy disappear over the bend. Good grief, that child will be the death of me one day. Still, a faint smile touched his lips as he followed, his pace steady but filled with pride. High above them, the owl circled in the open sky, its wide wings cutting through the breeze with effortless grace. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, swaying and whispering in the wind. The sunlight flickered between the trees, creating a dance of shadow and light. From the owl's view, two small figures made their way toward the distant woods, one bursting with youthful energy, the other walking at a measured pace behind. Their mission was dangerous, their goal uncertain, but for the moment, it was just a quiet morning, a fragile calm before the storm that waited beyond the trees. They finally arrived at the forest. Tall trees surrounded them, their roots twisting through the ground like veins of old battles. Millo looked around. We're here. Behind him, Arem sighed heavily, trying to hide his exhaustion. It was farther than I expected. You okay, Grandpa Arem? Millo asked. Arem straightened his back. I'm not that old. I can handle this without divine art. Millo smiled. Heh, sure you can. The old man grumbled, but the boy's laugh made him smile too. Millo sniffed the air, wrinkling his nose. Is this the smell after a battle? Ash, iron, and something bitter lingered around them. He frowned. The bird can't capture sounds, or smells either. Arem glanced back at him. You can wait here if it's too much, Millo. I can handle this part alone. Millo shook his head firmly. No way. Let's go. Arem smiled faintly at the boy's determination, then turned toward the dark forest ahead. The forest was silent except for the soft crunch of their steps on fallen leaves. Millo suddenly stopped, his eyes widening. Something felt off, a strange presence nearby, hidden behind the trees. He pushed through the tall grass and froze. Before him was a massive crater, the ground shattered as if struck by something powerful. Arem approached slowly, his face tense. This must have been the center of the battle, Millo whispered. They moved carefully through the tall grass, every sound amplified by the quiet. The forest was eerily still, sunlight barely reaching the ground. Millo felt a shiver run down his back. Arem stopped and looked up through the branches. "Stay alert," he murmured. The trees loomed above them, their twisted shapes hiding shadows that seemed to breathe. Something, or someone, was definitely out there. Millo stepped into a clearing, then froze. The ground was littered with bodies, armor shattered, weapons scattered. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and smoke. It was a battlefield turned graveyard. He moved closer, trembling, until he stopped beside a fallen soldier. The man's lifeless eyes stared at nothing. Millo's voice broke in a whisper, "Here. This." The reality of war finally struck him, cold and heavy. Millo covered his nose, the stench of blood and decay overwhelming. His wide eyes reflected both fear and disbelief. This was his first real glimpse of war's cruelty. But then, he straightened up, determination replacing the fear in his gaze. He stepped forward among the fallen, his hands trembling yet steady. If this was what it meant to face reality, he would face it head-on. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of what had happened here. Arem knelt beside a fallen soldier, his voice calm but heavy. "These were all Magic Empire troops," he said, studying the wounds. "One fighter took them all down." Millo clenched his fists, both amazed and unsettled. "More than 10, by one person," he muttered, eyes scanning the area. He looked around, determined. There might still be something left behind. But as he turned, something caught his eye. Arem's voice broke the silence, calm but firm. "We can't just stand here, Millo. Strip the gear from the corpses." Millo froze, the words echoing harshly in his ears. Before he could react, a hand touched his shoulder. He jumped, heart pounding. "If it's too hard for you," Arem said softly, "Gramps will do it." Millo shook his head, eyes trembling yet resolute. "And no. I can do it myself." He stepped forward, his small hands shaking. But his heart, unyielding. Millo took a shaky breath, forcing himself to move. His hands trembled as he tightened his grip. He'd seen scenes like this in movies before, but this was real. "This is my choice," he reminded himself. He was the one who pushed for this mission. Backing down now would betray everything he stood for. With clenched fists and a steady breath, he whispered, "I'll see it through, no matter what." Leaning against a tree, a knight's body sat motionless, armor cracked, sword buried in his chest. The sunlight glinted off the silver plates, a silent monument to a fallen warrior. Millo gasped. A holy knight's body. He turned to Arem, excitement and disbelief in his voice. "Gramps! Look!" Arem's eyes narrowed, recognizing the armor instantly. This was no ordinary soldier. Millo looked at the armored figure lying beneath the tree. He glanced at Alectem and asked softly, "Is this okay, Alectem?" Alectem's expression hardened. "Hold on." His voice carried a weight of command and respect. "We must treat the Holy Knight's corpses with care." Millo blinked, taken aback, but nodded quietly, realizing the gravity of the moment. Kneeling beside the knight, Alectem spoke again, his tone calm and reverent. "Yes, this is a soldier, but knights require different funerary rites, so be careful." Millo watched as the sunlight filtered through the leaves above. The armor of the fallen knight glinting faintly. A silent reminder of duty, honor, and the lives once lived. Millo looked at Alectem with concern. "It's that serious?" he asked, uncertain. Alectem crossed his arms, his expression grim. "If we treat the corpses roughly and the Holy Knight's kingdom finds out," he said firmly, "they'll hunt us down to the ends of the earth." Millo swallowed hard, realizing how grave the situation truly was. Millo clasped his hands and closed his eyes in silent respect. "This is my first time hearing of this, but," he whispered, "may you rest in peace." Alektam watched quietly from behind. If defiling corpses is forbidden, we can't take the holy knight's gear then, he muttered. Millo opened his eyes slowly. Well, the rites are done now, he said softly, turning toward the fallen knight with newfound respect. Alektam carefully searched the fallen knight's armor. Actually, he said calmly, taking their short blades and satchels is all right. He adjusted his grip and added, but it has to be taken by the one who performed the rites. Millo's eyes sparkled with realization. Oh, he exclaimed excitedly, holding up the bag filled with loot. Alektam gave a small nod, murmuring, there we go. Millo stood up, tightening his grip on his staff. This place is huge, let's move and search for more, he said with determination. Alektam lifted another bag from the ground. Not yet, we're not done, he replied. Then his voice turned serious. If we find a holy knight's corpse, we're to raise a smoke signal. Millo nodded, understanding the weight of those words. The mission wasn't just scavenging anymore. It was a duty. As Alektam raised his hand to signal silence, Millo stopped mid-sentence. So too he began, but Alektam shushed him sharply. Shoo! Millo froze, then turned his head, straining to listen. Through the whispering leaves came faint sounds. Hick! Hick! He frowned. A cry. A human voice. The two exchanged glances, the atmosphere suddenly tense. Alektam's voice was low and calm. I think I can hear a little girl's voice over there, Millo. Millo's eyes widened. Could be a civilian that got caught in this fighting. He clenched his fists and nodded with resolve. Let's go check it out, Grandpa Arem. Without waiting, he started moving toward the sound. His boots brushing through the tall grass as the faint sobs grew clearer. Millo and Alektam entered a devastated clearing, the aftermath of a brutal battle. Corpses of soldiers and shattered trees lay scattered across the ground, weapons buried in the soil. Millo whispered in awe, to be able to cut through sword and armor in just one swing. Alektam studied the scene carefully. At least it doesn't seem like the one who did this is the one we're hearing, he muttered, analyzing the damage. Millo looked around uneasily, forcing a small, awkward laugh. I read tons of stories like this in my past life, he said nervously. Then he sighed in relief. Luckily, I haven't met a super strong girl in this world yet. Alektam didn't respond, still scanning the area with a wary expression. As if he knew their luck might soon run out. The sound of quiet sobs echoed through the battlefield. Hick, sniff, hick. Millo and Alektam followed the sound cautiously, stepping over fallen soldiers. They finally stopped near a tree where a knight's armored body leaned lifelessly against the trunk. The soft, trembling voice continued, unmistakably human. A child's cry. Millo's expression darkened. Hick, that voice, it's close, he whispered. What's going on? Millo muttered, gripping his staff tightly. The crying's coming from that holy knight's corpse, right? Alektam's eyes narrowed. I don't know, he said quietly, his tone laced with unease. Then, after a brief pause, he added firmly. But once you find a knight, you have to take care of them, whether they're alive or dead. Millo swallowed hard, staring at the armored figure. Whatever was making that sound, it wasn't normal. They finally reached the tree. The knight's armor glinted faintly in the dim light, chained upright against the massive trunk, unmoving. Alektam raised a cautious hand. Don't get too close, he warned, his voice low and sharp. Millo nodded, gripping his staff tightly. Yeah, he whispered, unease creeping into his tone. The faint sobbing still echoed, threading through the silence like a ghostly wind. The two stood in silence before the chained knight. Millo's eyes narrowed as he noticed something strange. The vines were moving. He took a step closer, his voice trembling. Who? Alektam said nothing, his hand resting near his weapon, gaze fixed on the figure bound to the tree. The knight's armor shimmered under the dappled light, and somewhere inside it, something breathed. The sobbing grew louder as they moved closer to the chained knight. But when the figure lifted her head, Millimos froze. It wasn't a man in armor, it was a girl, trembling and clutching a short sword tightly. Ugh, ugh, she whimpered, her face pale and streaked with tears. Millimos blinked in surprise. She's not a civilian, huh? He thought. Why is a kid like her out here on the battlefield? Before he could take a step, the girl's eyes widened. She flinched, her grip on the sword tightening in fear. Her voice shook as she pointed the blade at them. Magic Empire soldier. Millimos panicked, waving his hands. No, this is just something I found on the ground. I'm not one of them. The girl didn't lower her weapon. Her body trembled, but her voice rose, proud and clear. I am the princess of the Holy Knight's kingdom, Mudu Beni Ernadal. Tututsui Regiomenia Mudu's second daughter. Millimos' jaw dropped. A princess? The girl's eyes burned with determination as she raised her voice. My name is Valera Irigiomenia Mudu. And I'd rather die fighting than suffer dishonor. Millimos and Alectem stood stunned. The trembling child before them, barely older than Millimos, radiated the spirit of a true warrior. Even surrounded by corpses and chaos, the princess' resolve shone like a blade in the dark.